Sarah Johnson is an associate senior manager of content strategy at CVS. She also teaches content strategy at the Bentley University User Experience Center. Sarah's worked for 25 years at companies such as CVS, TIAA, Fidelity Investments, and Bank of America. And she's here tonight to talk about content first design, a topic that is probably near and dear to most of our hearts. So Sarah, welcome, and please take it away.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you, everybody, for showing up tonight. I'm coming at you from Provincetown, Massachusetts, at the very end of Cape Cod, the end of the earth. It's about 9 o'clock for me, so if I fade, just nudge me. I know Larry will. So anyway, I wanted to talk to you all about content first design, which is a passion of mine. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it and teaching it and talking about it, and wanted to share some ideas with you. And I would love to hear questions at any point. Just stop me or put something up in the chat. I'm love to have an engaging conversation with y'all. So thank you. So how do we get from a page like this? We've all seen pages that are like a content nightmare. Like, where does the eye go? What are we supposed to read? What is this site even doing, right? How do we go from that old school? This is an extreme example, very extreme example of bad content, but I like it because it makes me laugh at how far we've come. So how do we get from this to something like this, where we have structured content, where we speak to people in understandable English and it's clear what they're on the site to do? We provide like a simple, streamlined, user-centered customer experience. So my approach is content first design, which means implementing a process using content and user analysis first in order to drive design based on content research and a strong content strategy. We want to do design with real words in the initial sketches. And if you look at this example is just a silly cartoon, but it just tries to illustrate the difference between putting pro number 1, pro number 2, pro number 3. Oops. Or actually getting words in there to help drive the design and think more about strategy and the conversation that we're trying to have with the user. Because if we're not designing a conversation, we can't design the architecture around the conversation. At the end of the day, we're having a conversation with a user. So what content first design is not? It's not intended to be used apart from UX, but as a preliminary step to inform the UX content strategy collaboration. And by analyzing and researching and evaluating content before we bring UX in, we can more aptly help improve the customer experience with knowledge of their language, their needs, and their preferences. We want to know what they're after on our website and help them achieve that. So there are 8 steps that I like to talk about for content first design. First, we do a content inventory. Paula will have a lot to say about this. We do a content audit. We explore conversation mapping. We create content maps, what I'm calling a content map. There are lots of interpretations of what that means. And we're going to sketch a page, write the content, test and iterate the page and content, and then get sign off from stakeholders. So the first step in the process is to take an inventory. I just wanted to start by saying I came up with these steps. I was asked to teach a course on content strategy at Bentley University. And these ideas came to me as sort of like, this is how I approach content strategy. And when I started to lay it out, I realized there could be many, many, many layers added. So I'll talk a little bit about that and weave it in as I go along. So a content inventory is a list of all the content on the website and where it lives. The benefits are it can help you scope and budget a project because you can see what you have to touch. It helps you get a handle on what you have and where it lives in order to understand like what maintenance you have to do and where you can edit or delete content. It helps identify redundancies, widows, or irrelevant or outdated content, and it provides a reference during your content strategy. It helps you keep track of what's getting done, where, when, and why, because it provides a whole list of every page and where everything is. So there are more reasons to do an inventory. It creates a clear picture of a content hierarchy, which in turn supports designing proper relationships between content and UX. It also lets you know if the content hierarchy needs to be adjusted. It identifies places where users need more information, find gaps in the experience. It helps locate page not found error messages, which can be removed or corrected. And it informs content strategy plans moving forward and provides a solid document for a sound rationale. We're trying to create a picture of what we have and where we need to go based on the user's experience, how they think, feel, act, and what they want. So content inventory will generally include the following information. It can include all kinds of stuff, but these are some basics. Each piece of content gets an ID number, the URL where it lives, the meta elements such as the page title, description, and keywords, a content type, is it a landing page, a blog post, a video, media assets, audio and video, documents. Do we have downloadable file types? Who the intended audience is, the time it was last updated, and who that author and owner is, comments that we want to make as we're going through and noticing things or notes, page views they get, average time on the page, a bounce rate, and a page score. So this is all to look at sort of the performance of the page, these last items, whereas the first initial items are more information about the page itself. So I'm going to use some examples as we go through this. And I'm going to use an example by Aaron Roots, who's a digital media manager at MFS Investment Management. And he was in one of the classes I taught at Bentley. And we walk through this exercise of content first design in the class. So I wanted to have some illustrations, and I can't show them from work, so I'm showing them from the people in my class. And in the workshop, the participants looked at gatesandfences.com for a redesign using this content first design approach. So defining the scope. So part of what you do before you start the inventory is identify how much you want to include and what you want to include. If you have 100 or more pages, inventory all of the content. If you have thousands of pages, start with the sections most critical to the user experience. And even 100 pages is a lot. If you're looking at a small piece of a website, it could be 5 to 10 pages. And it can be anywhere in between. And then through user research and business analysis, you can help identify the areas most important for customers and for your business, then focus on those in the scope of your inventory. So this is an inventory of an imaginary website that this guy, Aaron, made up. He didn't totally get what I wanted to do, but where he listed the page title, he gave it an ID, a page level, a page title, the URL, the content type, and then he was going to add keywords and descriptions, but he didn't have time. And this is just a sample of how you can set it up in a spreadsheet. And I'll let you guys just take a look at that for a second, follow a few lines of it. Does anyone have any questions? I'm all ears. Okay, feel free to interrupt anytime.
Well, actually,
so there are
I
also
will just interject that there's a great little conversation going on in the chat about widows and orphans, and speculation on my part about what the analogy is. And actually, Jim just shared a picture that like makes me realize that, oh yeah, you could totally still have those in like two column layouts and stuff. So
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so old school, but it happens. There are also, and Paula could speak probably way more to this than I can, tools that can do a quick inventory for you automatically. Because if you're looking at 100 pages, to go through this line by line is a tremendous amount of work. Whereas if you can automate even some of it, it's super helpful. And you can just Google content inventory, content website inventory tool, and it will come up. Okay, then the next step would be to use the content inventory framework that you've built to do an audit and actually evaluate what you've got on the site. So with the inventory document, you go through the site and analyze each of the pieces of content for various attributes that you would identify based on the user needs and the business requirements. So these could be the findability of the content, the readability, the relevance to the user at that place and point in the flow, the timeliness of it. Is it redundant? Have we already heard that, like on the previous little section? And what the overall quality of the content is. You can make notes, have sections for notes, comments, like the one I did at work had a section for the plan to address it. So there are 3 types of audits that are often talked about, and one is a quantitative audit inventory, which identifies page titles, URLs, metadata, traffic stats, etc. And that's what I described earlier. Then there's a qualitative audit with a best practices assessment. And this looks at content from an outsider's point of view and measures it against the best practices and user needs. Is the content useful, usable, enjoyable, and persuasive? So here we go through and actually look at, like, how good is our content? Is it achieving what we want it to do? Is it using our voice and tone style guides? Is it speaking on brand? Is it easy for people to read? Is it annoying or not annoying? Like what's the deal with this piece of content? And then a qualitative audit and a strategic assessment looks at how the content aligns with the content and business strategies based on prevision work, like where are the gaps, what's working, and what needs help. So this is more based on strategy rather than best practices. 3 types of audits. So to do, the one that I typically do in a workshop is a qualitative audit. You use the content inventory as your starting document because it sets up the whole framework of all your pages in your area of your website you're auditing. And you decide what factors you want to evaluate and how you'll be measuring them and on what set of pages. Like you could have like usability, readability, relevance, timeliness, and rate them on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 5. Then you can take notes of your observations and maybe come up with a plan. And this can be a living, growing document. And then create a spreadsheet with the pages and factors you measure, such as this one that Aaron did for gates and fences. And I'm going to just let you guys look at this. I shouldn't say guys, I mean you people, you everybody. So you can see that he grabbed the key messages, keywords, the goal of the page, and the key actions, and the knowledge level of the customer. So those were the things that we decided to audit for the particular pages he was looking at. So I want you to just take a minute to look and think about what you have for questions about inventories and audits to understand what the difference is and what an audit is. Anybody want to say anything?
Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Hi. I'm curious, in this audit, do you like rate these things on a scoring chart of some sort, or using?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So like for key messages, words, goals, key actions, knowledge level, those are like informational audit things where it's like things like readability, usability, findability, on brand, on content style guides, those types of qualitative things I would rate. These are more quantitative, identifying quantities of things. Does that help?
Yes, that does. Thank you. I'm curious, when you do use a rating system, like, do you have any best practices for that?
That's a tough question because it's so subjective.
Mm-hmm.
So you would try and just say, what each number means. If it's 1 to 5, what is that? Oops, sorry. What is that? What does a 1 mean? What does each one mean? Is the readability, it could be from very poor to highly satisfactory, and try and, based on the content style guides and how the company operates from a content strategy point of view, come up with an agreement around how we're looking at things.
Yeah. If I could jump in just for a second.
Please do, Paul.
I'm very much trying not to.
Content inventories.
I am trying not to. But
no, do. I really want you to.
Yeah. So, I mean, with a qualitative audit and to the point of kind of how you measure things, two things. One is I strongly recommend that where it isn't something like, just capturing the key, the keywords or whatever, whenever there is an actual evaluation of something, that you work from a controlled vocabulary, so that everyone is selecting, what those terms are. Right. And if it is a matter of, like a numeric rating or whatever, as Sarah was saying, like I often use like good, fair, poor, or, sometimes, could be 1, 2, 3 or whatever, you kind of have to choose the rubric that makes sense to you. But given that, quite often you're going to be sharing this information with at least some other people, potentially clients or whatever, the better you can define those criteria, say, what does it actually mean to say that, on the criterion of, discoverability, for example, just one I use, quite often, what does it mean to say that something is good, right? That the links work, that things are in context, that, there's good cross-linking, that it appears in the information architecture where you would expect it to appear, whatever, right? That might be sort of good. Fair might be, it was a little hard to find, but it's, the cross-linking is okay, or, it's in the right place, but it's not showing up everywhere I would have expected to, kind of along my customer journey or whatever. And poor means I can't find it, or, it's hard to find or whatever. Anyway, the whole point just being like, you really clearly define those so that, when, first of all, to help you make decisions about things, but also if you are presenting that to someone else, to your stakeholders, your coworkers, your clients, you can say, here is exactly what we meant by giving it that rating. And that's going to imply, whatever action would come after that, right? You've got to rewrite this, or you really need to think about this page's placement in the IA, or, what's linking to whatever. So I think the crisper you can be about all of your terminology and what everything means and what your metrics, actually mean when you apply those. And that also helps once you get everything into your spreadsheet and you've made all these analyses. It's another reason to be using a really standardized set of terms so that you can sort and filter and find everything that, for example, for this audience is, usability is poor or whatever, you can start to kind of sort and matrix and find patterns of problems. So sorry, I'm going to shut up now.
No, you don't have to shut up at all.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
That's great. Super good. Does anybody else have a question?
I have a quick question,
Sure.
Sarah. Hi. Yeah. Where do you bring in, when you're doing content audits and content inventories, where do you bring in concepts or content types? Like in the pages we're looking at here, like these are probably all instances of a product category except for homepage. Like where would that part of the process?
Driveway gates, yeah, whoops, sorry. So yeah, that would be for a product category, but what do you mean, where's the concept? Like, this is very preliminary work, so there is no concept yet. This is all the.
Oh, I'm sorry, like content
okay.
type. Content type.
Oh, content type.
Yeah.
Yeah, those would be things, he didn't put a column in here, but content type would be, text and images, video, PDF.
But like the conceptual content type, like the kind of the thing that's sort of meaningful to the end user. So like you might have product category, promotion, like all the different things that those pages would be categorized.
Right.
I'll put this word out there that I hate using, but at the page template, like the type of page that it is, or the purpose of the page.
I see what you mean.
I call it an object, but usually in content strategy, it's a content type. It's like the conceptual thing.
Right,
like, would that be a column in this? Or I'm just wondering how that comes into your work.
Right. I haven't really done that. That's interesting. I don't know if Paula can speak to that. Like what type of page it is. Is it a contact page? Is it like a transactional page? Is that what you mean? Like a transactional page?
Well, usually in these systems that have a lot of things that have been instantiated. So like for the product, like in this case, for the gates, I mean, they might have 100,000 products, or if it's Amazon, or like, so to be able to say, okay, so of these, you have all of these pages, but where does it come in where you start saying that these are the things that these pages are representing?
Right. So I see what you mean.
Yeah, I would say about that, that is typically something I try to capture, and partly again, it's the various reasons. And anytime you're doing an audit, before you even start, the first thing you should do is say, what questions am I trying to answer?
Yeah.
Because those kinds of questions specifically, like what page type is it, or what template is it in, even like literally the CMS template or whatever, those matter, a lot if you're doing, a redesign, or you're doing a content migration. If you're doing something like a brand refresh or something, that might be less important. In that case, you might be looking more for particular terminology or imagery or whatever, right? So, it's kind of like, what kind of project are you doing, and what do you need that information for? And then, often you can, derive, well, it depends on the site, right? You can derive that from the URL sometimes, if it's like articles or product or whatever, right? Sometimes you have to just kind of derive that by going through, your audit and looking at pages and determining what it is. There's a whole other level of that, which is, components on pages. And if you need to kind of talk about, how many pages have a particular, a share function, whatever it is, right? I mean, the various components that might be, but generally, I mean, I think for most purposes, you kind of just want to know, is this product content? Is this, is this a help article? Is this a blog post? Is this, a campaign landing page or whatever? So,
well, I've actually adopted your language sometimes to talk about that. I'll talk about a content type audit and a content type inventory, as part of my content modeling practice. So
yeah, because you might want to know, are we really over-indexed on, one kind of content? We have, this is where kind of a gap analysis can come in too. And sorry, I feel like I'm taking this in a whole different direction.
Go for it.
Something like a customer journey as well, right? So you can kind of say, here's a customer journey, here's the content that we can map to each of these steps. So if, for example, we want to know, kind of how are we doing on the conversion step of a customer journey, and we see, well, how much content do we have that's really directly related to getting someone to purchase or join or download or whatever, right? And then matrix that with what's the quality of that content. You can kind of go, wow, this is the main thing we need people to do, and that's the worst quality content on our site, or whatever patterns you sort of detect. So I think there's a whole lot here of, again, kind of what are the questions you're trying to answer, and then how can you matrix together this information to find really specific actionable, I hate that word, sorry, recommendations or whatever.
That's really helpful, Paula.
Hey, Paula, Sarah, there's also a question in the chat. Tess is asking, Perhaps it only needs to be in the audit if it needs to be measured or monitored.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Like, yeah.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you know, there's certain content that has to be there, and you don't need to audit it usually. You know, you're not gonna audit your terms of service, your legal stuff for, you know, evergreen content that isn't going to change or that you're keeping there for archival reasons or whatever. But yeah, sorry, I'm gonna shut up.
Stop apologizing. This is I like good share.
I can't stop on this topic, unfortunately.
Having a conversation is good.
Yeah. Anyway, please go ahead.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for asking questions. I like that it's participatory. It's awesome. So the third thing we do is we lead a conversation mapping exercise. And this helps you get inside the customer experience with a role-playing exercise, and it's a hypothetical conversation with an imaginary user. Now, if you're in a team that has a research team and they can align with actual customers and have a real conversation, even better. But I developed this for like examples of like small teams I've worked on in enterprise corporations where sometimes you need to do guerrilla testing, and sometimes you need to just get down and dirty and come up with some answers faster than the user research team can do it, or faster than like money and bureaucracy allows. So that's the idea of this, is it's a guerrilla test. So you can explore some or all the following. You can look at what the customer is looking for or what their goal is on the website. You can look at why they've come to the website, how much they understand about the topic, products or services, and how they talk, like what words they use, what tone, what voice. I'd also say, like, what are their apprehensions? What things make them nervous? Using the example, say, of I worked at a financial services company. People are very bejiggity around their money, right? So the things that make them nervous are setting up passwords and transferring money and anything that has to do with digitally interacting with money. Things they feel more comfortable with are, you know, account information or stuff like that. So the benefits of conversation mapping, it can help you gain empathy for the customer's experience, understand like where they're coming from, how they feel at different steps of a process. You can help understand their needs, what they're looking for and what they need to know before they carry out an act or continue or leave a site. You learn how to speak their language, use their words, their tone, their knowledge level. And a lot of fields obviously have like jargon and high level, like we all do. We have so much jargon, but how do real people speak who are interacting with our website, and how can we speak more directly to them? And we want to create a user experience that's more informed by a customer point of view. So this is a sample of just a brief portion of a conversation map that we did in class. And Aaron did this. So first he needed to identify the traits of the user you're conducting your imaginary interview with. And the example here, the user was a private residential customer looking to purchase a fence. Okay, so you can scan the conversation. How can I help you? I'm looking for a fence. And they go through this little process. And if you just take a look at that for a minute, and then we can talk about what to do with it. Okay. So here, the takeaways were that the customer wanted to specify features such as a dog fence. The customer wanted to know about extra services such as tree removal, and they wanted to know about financing. So those are just some touch points to keep in mind as you're working through next steps. So based on that conversation map and what you know about the business goals, how can you lead the customers through an experience that helps all of us achieve our goals? Identify the customer need at each step of a user journey. For example, purchasing a remote control at gates and fences. So what does the customer want? We're going to set this up with a little map. What do they want? What are the steps to help them get what they want? And what are the possible pain points? Lousy search capabilities, not enough product information, hard to navigate checkout process, for example. So this is an example based on LL Bean, where we just go through an example and say, the customer need was, I want to search for a woman's flannel shirt. The story point was to provide a search feature and menu browse functionality. And what we wanted them to do was to select a shirt. And we go through each of these all the way down to, I want to check out, make the checkout easy, and they make the purchase. So this just provides another layer of guidance as we start to think about how to structure a conversation with this user. So this is an example for gates and fences. So the first step was a customer need was that I want to look for a remote control for my gate. And the story point was provide a landing page clearly displaying the available inventory. And the desired outcome was that they would look, view the various options. So then we get down into they want to know details, and we want them to look at product pages. And you guys can take a minute to read this, and it will save my voice. And ask questions. And can you see how this is starting to form a picture in our mind of how someone might approach the website, what they might be looking for, how they might expect to see it, the different varieties of questions they might have. And this is a super simplified example. But I'm hoping that you could sort of extrapolate it to maybe something you do at your job and think of how you could maybe implement it to look at a little piece of a website or a page that you're redoing. Like I do a lot of work, transactional work for e-commerce right now at CVS. And so much of it is looking at small experiences and doing an exercise like this where we really break it out into step by step. It's really, just step by step looking at what people want and need, how we're going to get it to them, and what we hope they do.
Sarah, is one of the main points of that to think about content hierarchy or a priority guide?
Yeah, definitely. To sort of look at, yes, hierarchy, like people can go in these different directions. How are we going to trickle down information?
Mm-hmm.
Is there another? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Brendan had a question about could the story point also be called the touch point of the user journey?
Mm-hmm. That's a better word, touch point. Thank you, Larry.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Brendan. Yeah.
I'm curious, Sarah, have you used empathy maps? It's a little bit different.
Yeah, I have that in the book. I don't have it here in this example. Empathy maps and emotional mapping are really good. And the whole idea is to just do as much as you can to get inside the customer or the user, to get inside their experience and create a conversation with them that's meaningful. We're trying to be humans in a crazy, crazy world. So the next part of the exercise, step 5, was to sketch a page with just initial rough draft content. So you've learned a lot through the pre-vision work, and it's time to dig in. So the content needs to be scannable with headlines and subheadings. Important information comes first. We want to use short paragraphs and sentences with no unnecessary words, bullet points and lists, written for the audience, no jargon, no passive tense, no redundancies. This is just like a snippet of UX writing, and I give them, in the course I give, some more in-depth UX writing information, but for a down and dirty workshop, you can do, some basic feedback. So this was the page that Aaron was looking at. And it looks like it's trying to sell multi-code something. Anyway, so problems on the page. So he did an evaluation of the page. The products appear to be grouped by brand, but don't have any additional groupings. The page copy isn't included between groups of products and alternates between the product description and the brand information and customer service information. And the page CTAs vary from buy it now, hyperlinks, and add to cart CTA buttons. So there's sort of what the gist, he was just finding such a mishmash of information and no real user flow. So what Aaron did was he thought about how to structure the content based on the content map and the conversation map and the auditing and the inventory and analysis. So taking the feedback of keeping the content brief and the groupings more clear, and he came up with the idea of filtering for different types of content because there was so much just listed randomly on a page that he figured organizing it by brands, by transmission frequency, by buttons, channels, remote type could help people hone in on what they were looking for. And then the promotional items he put over on the right and simplified the navigation. He did all of that structurally just from looking at the content. And this is before he had like a UX designer or anybody to do it. And this is obviously like a rough copy, low fidelity. But with just looking at content and analyzing and evaluating and getting inside the user, empathizing with the user, you can come up with initial designs that will then evolve once you get to work with a content designer. And when you get involved as a content strategist with the design team, you have a really solid perspective as where you're coming from with the content strategy. So his solutions were to focus on the core messaging, make things scannable, get rid of all the redundancies, and he moved all the technical information to the pages below, which would be the product pages. And he put tooltips to provide support, the little question marks. And then he did, so I'm going to just go back there. Like, how's everybody doing? We have questions, thoughts?
How did he know that filtering by brand would have been important to users?
Because the brands on the previous page, I didn't take a screenshot of the whole page, but they were all sort of tossed in together.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they all had a red brand name with then the numbers and these, then the megahertz, then the number of buttons, and the number of channels. So I think he mimicked the order that was there. Mm-hmm. But just tried to break it out so that it was scannable.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. Feel free to chime in at any time. So just get past this. So the next step in the exercise was to test with this lo-fi sketch that we've come up with. We want to see how it tests and what we can do to evolve the design a little bit. And more importantly, what we're trying to do is evolve our design, our content strategy thinking. We want to go in with a solid idea of what our content strategy proposal is going to be. And that doesn't mean that design, what we sketch out is going to be what the design looks like. It means we have a strong content strategy in mind. So now that you have a map or a sketch, you can do some user research or usability studies, both formally and informally. Before you take your sketches to the real world, you can run them by people you work with, or the folks at home, like guerrilla testing. You can have anybody look at this. We've grabbed people on other teams, people on other trains, people in product, like to just walk through, and we ask a series of questions and get some quick feedback. So we create a list of scenarios for users that will illuminate pain points. And if the user doesn't understand, if they get to a point where they don't get it, we ask how they would explain it. And this can reveal language choices, knowledge, reading levels, and tone. So we're trying to suss out where all the pain points are. So we want to ask specific questions to direct the user's attention. And this is really just basic usability researching. And there are a million ways to do this, but we're just gonna do sort of an interview walkthrough process. So we're gonna ask the user, what are you seeing overall? How likely are you to read the page on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being not likely, 10 being very likely. What would you do next, and what's missing for you on the page? So this was Aaron's little user interview exercise. What are you seeing overall on the page? Dense information, unclear headings, content that requires a high education level. I mean, he picked up a lot. I'll let you scan through this to get a sense of how he collected the data from the users who walked through his sketch. And just from some of these tests, he was able to do another iteration. I'm just reading it myself while you guys do. Okay, so get sign off from stakeholders such as product, business, legal, and marketing. This is one of my favorite parts. So the idea to do that is you come up with this strong content strategy rationale, and now you can sort of present it. You don't just present like, here, you've worked with UX design, you've taken your content strategy, you've gone to UX design, you've evolved these plans. And when you go to talk to stakeholders beyond UX design, such as product, business, legal, and marketing, you have a reason when you present your pages why you're using these words and where you're using them, why this is on the page and this is not on the page. And you have the research to back it up and the analysis, and you know your own thoughts, like you know your user right now. You know what they're trying to do, where they've been, and where they're going. So you can come in and create a conversation with these stakeholders that's strategic instead of just opinion. Like, I don't like the word product, or I could you use a different, it raises the level of conversation from one of opinion to one of strategy, and really thinking through business requirements and customer needs. And I found that it creates just really empowering collaborative conversations at every step of the process once you get into the design phase. So does anybody else have questions? It's a lot of steps, but it's a very simplified version, and the book that I'm working on is more evolved, and I'll be talking to Paula a lot about inventories and audits. But I definitely would love feedback, anything you wish you learned and didn't, anything that was helpful or not, or if you have any questions, like bring it on.
And Tess had one more question in the chat. And Tess, if you just want to unmute and ask the question, that's fine.
Yeah, thanks. This was great. Thank you, first of all. Very helpful, all of it. I was just curious, why wouldn't that user questioning about the bad site have come earlier?
Yeah, you're right. That was a mistake. And I'm sorry, I just put that in there and I realized it was the wrong one. It should have been from his new site and it wasn't. And I'm sorry.
No worries. Okay.
Hate it when that happens. But yes, I will clean that up, and I am sorry for the confusion. I wanted to give you all, I have 2 pages of resources. I wanted to give you a chance to take a screenshot of these books in case you're interested. I'll give you a couple minutes to do that, and then I have some podcasts that I'll let you screenshot.
Well, Sarah, there was another question in the chat.
Oh,
LP, brand new question about user test on the wireframe. Is it preferable to be moderated or unmoderated?
Oh, moderated, sure. And it can be even by you. If you're doing guerrilla testing, you can go to anyone on another team at your job or someone with a different point of view and ask them, you can ask them the questions yourself and just take notes. You know, I mean, the idea is to like, how can we implement this like quickly in our daily practice? We don't want to say we need a month for content first. We want to be able to just like, to do some things to get our strategy going before we hit the ground so that we hit the ground running when we meet up with UX design. So that content has a voice at the table really early in the process and that we know what our strategy is early in the process. And it will evolve just like everything will over the course of a project, but that we're coming from a strong, insightful position.
Yeah, if I could throw in again, I think that getting a seat at the table early, you know, is so critical. I think I'm curious if anyone else has had this experience, and it's funny, Sarah, you had Kevin's stuff there. He and I were just talking about this earlier today. Having been in the position of being the content strategist who is brought in very late in a project, and after a design has been, you know, sold to a client, and you know, everyone's excited about the creative, and then you kind of have to reverse engineer a content strategy that will actually, or you know, reverse engineer the content to fit into a design that never was built to accommodate it. And so I think we can't talk about this enough as content strategists, like the importance of being really right there at the start. I mean, as soon as a project is launched, that you have to be there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In the very, very beginning, and it takes a lot of like advocating.
And throughout.
Yeah, it takes a lot of advocating for content design from the very beginning. Like we've had to, a lot of my content strategists that I manage have had to work really hard with their UX, UI designers and product partners to get them in those initial meetings. And if we're not in the initial meetings, we can't do our footwork. We're going to be relying on all the visual people we're going to be reacting and not responding to what we see. We're going to be reacting, oh shit, we need a headline, instead of, you know, having a thoughtful, informed approach. I just want to thank everybody because your comments have helped me figure out, you know, the next steps for the presentation to get honed in more. It was really good questions and conversation. And I appreciate that.
I know one thing I always try and coach the clients that I work with on is to find those crazy outlier pages that you have. The press release that's got 10 different people that are quoted at the bottom of it, or the article with 13 different figures and 20 footnotes and 10 references, like the thing that just breaks your design system and takes it for a real ride. Like those are the types of pages that you should be focusing on when you're looking at your content and making sure like you can accommodate not always the outlier, but at least come up with a plan that allows you to look at, you know, these outliers and say, okay, so if this happens again, or if this happens and we can't change it, what are we going to do? Like we need to come up with a plan for that.
Right.
Sarah, and Drew had another question. And Drew, if you want to unmute and ask it, or I can just read it, your choice. Oh, I think, are you muted or? through the. I
Oh, the
think
maintenance
audio-
practice for
I'll
keeping
just
an
read the
inventory?
question. I'm sorry, go ahead, Sarah. Yeah.
Is it the one about a maintenance practice?
Yeah, the maintenance practice. Yeah, yeah.
What's your
yeah.
maintenance practice like for keeping an inventory and doing auditing? Do you determine a frequency based on volume of changes? Pages created time based. I'm curious about the variables that influence the maintenance schedule. That is a really good question. And this is one we're going to have Paula weigh in. But I would say it depends on what is the purpose of the inventory and auditing. Is it for a project that's going to take a year? Is it something you want? There are inventories and audits that are done for the whole website and used for that. But then there are ones you do just to go in and address a specific piece of work. And the ones I'm talking about are to go in and address a specific piece of work.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think, there's a process called a rolling audit, right? Which is doing an audit, and, you kind of have to do the inventory before you do the audit anyway. So to me, they're, essentially, one project, but you do have to kind of figure out what the right cadence of that is. And part of it is, how much content do we publish every year? Are we adding 100 pages every year, or every 6 months or whatever, or is it a mostly static site? That's definitely one thing. What's our highest value content? Have we changed anything about our messaging or our brand, or are we rolling out, to new markets, or, whatever, there's, lots of reasons to kind of re-audit content. You might do it up front, as Sarah's saying, in front of like a big project. But one thing you don't want to do, if you can help it, is need to do a gigantic, massive audit project too frequently, right?
Right.
Kind of like weeding your garden, right? It's like if you let it go to weeds, you've got a huge project on your hand. If once a week you go out and pull some weeds, you keep it looking decent, and it's always kind of up to date or whatever. So frequency of content, just making sure that it's still meeting your goals. If anything has changed about your audiences or whatever, and you can scope it to one section, whatever's kind of the most relevant section, depending on what's going on with your business. Or you can just say, once a year we look at everything. We just make sure that everything is still okay. It really, that's definitely one of those kind of it depends questions, but it's absolutely something you should do. It's sort of like as frequently as makes sense, but knowing that, these are resource intensive projects, which is another reason to kind of, maybe you only audit new content, or, you only audit content that's, again, like really, a critical path to your, to your conversion, or, to your content customer journey or whatever. So it might be something you do once a year, it might be something you do every other year, it might be something you do, quarterly, whatever. But it's definitely a good idea to kind of keep the garden weeded.
Yeah. I wanted to call out a book that someone mentioned in the chat, Articulating Design Decisions. I read that after I developed this system for how to present a content strategy rationale. And then I found that book, and it's very, it's aligned, but it's different for content strategy. So if anyone ever wants to email me about that conversation, I'd love to have it.
And I want to thank everyone for contributing all the resources in the chat. We'll harvest all of them, and we'll get them in the queue for our resources part of our new website.
Woohoo!
So keep them coming too. I guess that's the other point of that. So.
Yeah.
I had another question.
Yes.
So from the steps that you showed us, I'm curious, like from when I saw the wireframe, and I was thinking like, okay, so ideally, would you like pass that off to a UX designer, or like present it to the UX designer? Like, how would that work in the real world?
I think so. It's going to be different everywhere, and you have to come up with your own process. But to like when to bring in the UX designer, but we just do the sketch to illustrate how much you can design just looking at content and the user.
I see. Mm-hmm.
And so then by the time you get together with the UX designer, I wouldn't say, I think it should be this. But you could say, this is how I've been thinking about the conversation. we're having with the user, and this is my content strategy.
Okay, that's
And
great.
if they want to see your lo-fi sketches, I think the one I showed you was done in PowerPoint. And then I have students who turn them in and they're super hi-fi. But you know, you'd be coming into the relationship with the UX designer with a very strong sense of what the content strategy is about.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I was going to say on that, I think there's an opportunity for us to do more there, Kim, now that we have a seat at the table, or at least a foot in the door a lot of places now. And I think it may be on us to figure out those new working methods with our colleagues. And it's probably going to depend on the team you're on and as well. So I think it's a good time to be curious about stuff like that.
I agree.
It's a really good point. And like not having to stick to a certain workflow.
Yeah, and the idea is like you have these concepts that I've introduced, and how can you implement them into how you work? Like all of our design groups are different, all of our teams are different. How can we as content people influence change within how design happens? And the more that, you get what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yes, that's very inspiring too.
Good.
Yes. Thank you.
This is actually a question that came up today for me. So I'm putting it out to anyone here. Also, I want to say thanks to Sarah and Paula and Larry for everything today and for hosting this. We've touched on it a couple of times in terms of getting content into the process early rather than later.
Right.
As leaders of teams, what are the ways that you have spoken specifically to other folks, PMs, engineering, design, to advocate for content and getting folks who are doing content into the process early?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Like when I started at CVS, it was a year ago, I took the time to meet all the PMs, the UX leads, and the UI designers, so that I could let them know sort of what we're talking about with getting content involved early, so that when my content strategist went to work with these people, it wasn't coming from out of left field. And they had to, some of the relationships were difficult. Like people really didn't want to relinquish visual, like that control of design to be, the concept of thinking about the conversation with the user was so disorienting to someone who's nailed down with visuals, that some of those conversations were really challenging and took time. You know, they took time for people to sort of open up and get on board. But, you know, you have to just start chipping away. You know, relentless. Right? Yeah. Anybody else? Anything in the chat?
Sarah, I'd like to get your opinion on the change of the name from content strategists to more recently content designers.
Oh my God. All right. So this is what I think about that. In my mind, content strategy is a big bubble like this, and within it sits content design. And within the bubble of content strategy and within the bubble of content design sits UX writing. So I look at them as that content strategy is a thing in of itself and contains both the design and the UX writing. And I think design contains UX writing, and I think UX writing is UX writing, but it also uses a lot of strategy. So there's a lot of, I think it's a lot of parlance that's getting sorted out over time. People seem to like the word content design. Like at work the other day, someone said, I think we should switch to content design from content strategy because people think that's cool now. And I was like, you know, it's more important to be aligned around what your practice is before you decide what to call it, I think. And just aligning around what it is a lot of work.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? People are posting job opportunities, so take a look at the chat if you're interested.
Hi, I'm going to jump in.
Yeah.
I'm Jill. I'm from Vancouver, BC, and the pandemic has brought me the amazing opportunity to join the Seattle Content Strategy Meetup. So thank you, Paula and Larry, for continuing to host these and making them awesome. And Sarah, for your talk, and everyone for your questions and comments. I've been following along keenly here. I wanted to share an answer to that question.
Yeah.
That I think it was Evan who asked, or who put it out there, the question of how do you insert content design earlier on in the design process?
Yeah.
So I wanted to share with you an example that I actually heard and loved that a coworker gave when we were interviewing her for a role with my former employer.
Yes.
We were looking for a UX writing practice lead. So someone to lead our group of UX writers and coach them, mentor them, train them, teach them best practice or good practices in UX writing. So one of the questions was, can you give us an example of when you have done this? Like helped carve out space for the discipline. And she said, yes, working with this former employer's legal team on the privacy policy. And she showed them, I guess they'd been going back and forth on updating this privacy policy, which, by the way, happens to be my passion, privacy policies. But anyway, so I was like, oh, let's hire her. She's talking about privacy policy. Anyway, she showed them, I guess, in the course of their work and a lot of back and forth where the stakeholders they were working with from the legal team were saying, well, we're just not confident that we can move into this more human-centered language that you're proposing to us. We like things the way they are, et cetera. So she actually mocked up an example of here's what this would look like if you did this. Like, here's what your privacy policy could appear as, just a mock-up. And they liked it enough that they were involving her and her team more from the get-go going forward. So that's kind of I guess that's less about like, how do I get in early from the start, but more, how do I make friends and influence people?
Yeah, so that's like, she had a strategy and a rationale for her strategy. And I think when you have that, however you show it, to be able to put that out earns you trust.
Yeah. And the fact that it was the organization's own content, it wasn't like, oh, this is one of our competitors.
No,
we could never do that.
Exactly.
Yeah. I thought that was super cool. So
very cool.
Anyway,
thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. I will tell her that I shared this comment.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Oh, and actually, I wanted to comment on the content strategy versus content design paradigm thing too.
Yeah, go for it.
So in my last organization, I actually helped to design myself out of a job as a content strategy practice lead, because we decided that content strategists and UX writers should be the same roles. And we called out content strategy and content design as being within the discipline of UX writing because of how it works in the organization.
See what I mean? There's so many ways people are looking at it. There's no answer that's
and we realized content strategy is a set of accountabilities that are actually across many teams.
Right.
Like there's big C content strategy, which people thought was a certain thing because that's what we had called the taxonomists for the for our product catalog for years. And we weren't doing as much of that work, et cetera, et cetera. So it just, politically, these were the terms that worked for us. And we found different opinions from different blog writers all over the internet. I'm exaggerating. They were like two contrasting opinions on it, but that we looked at. So I will join Sarah in saying it sounds like the jury is still out on that, and perhaps it'll evolve in time.
I'll say it's fun. If I can't remember which podcast she's talked about it, but Christina Halverson talks about this a lot and has a lot to say. And I shared in the chat, John Collins at Atlassian has this really interesting take on the organization of the content professions, which basically like he sees it as like content strategy, content design, content engineering, and content operations is like the main things. And he sees them all kind of co-equal. I don't know what the overarching bucket that he put them in is. I forget if he talks about that. Anyhow, but like you said, one of many ways to look at this.
Anybody else?
Look, we're wrapping up. I'll just take a moment to say thank you, everyone, for joining. Great conversation. Thank you so much, Sarah. Obviously, content first design is something we all need to be advocating for.
Yeah.
And good luck, everybody, in your own private struggles with that. Keep an eye out for Sarah's book when that comes out.
Yeah, and definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want to connect. I'm around.
Yeah. Join our Slack channel, share job openings, help us out. Join our little volunteer group here if you're interested. Content Strategy Seattle at gmail.com if you just want to reach out to somebody or reach us on Slack. Other than that, have a good evening, everybody. And Sarah, thanks for staying up so late.
Oh, no, thank you both, everybody. Thank you very much. It was fun. Great conversation.